But a lot of it was around even the 666 thing. They say if you translate it originally to the numbers, that's actually referencing.
The question for me is, why is Revelation in Scripture? Like, what's the point of the book? Why did God give it to us? The misleading answer that sometimes we get sucked into is that, is Revelation talking about the future? Is it talking about now? Is it talking about the first century? There's a concept known as double fulfillment of prophecy. And it's like, if you just picture the prophet looking ahead and he's seeing these events, it's like he's how so much in Revelation seems to have already been fulfilled, but then at the same time, how
Ruslan.
As a writer, I'm curious your take on this, and I don't want to go super deep, but it seems like we're living through different chapters of Revelation, right? Like there's like natural disasters, earthquakes, in Matthew 24, Jesus talking about war, rumors of war. It really seems like this is a unique time in history, right? But then there are those who would point to the fact that even Revelation seems to have been written, at least in part, addressing some of the things that were happening in their climate, meaning that, yes, some of it is for the future when Jesus returns, but a lot of it was around even the 666 thing. They say if you translate it originally to the numbers, that's actually referencing Nero, and it was code for Nero. I actually think the language may even not be 666, but like 616, I think, was the original. So as a writer, like when you read Revelation and you see what we're living through today, what do you make of that? Do you see some of the partial preterist position that, yeah, some of this stuff may have already happened, this end time stuff is definitely coming, but it's not as if we're literally living through the book of Revelation. That some of that was contemporary to what John was going through while he was writing it.
Yeah. Man, we're diving into it now.
Deep.
Yeah. So the question for me is, why is Revelation in Scripture? Like, what's the point of the book? Why did God give it to us? I think the misleading answer that sometimes we get sucked into is that Revelation exists so that we can know the future and avoid those bad outcomes. But what it often does through that lens is it creates more fear and, forces people to make predictions that they probably shouldn't. I think one of the main thrusts of the book of Revelation is to give God's people hope that though evil does exist, and it's pretty dark, it's pretty visceral, despite all of that God is in control and that he wins. So like some of the big takeaways for me would be Jesus is coming back, God wins, and then get busy. Like he's given us work to do so we don't have to be afraid, And then in terms of, is Revelation talking about the future? Is it talking about now? Is it talking about the first century? I don't want to get overly technical with it, but there's a concept known as double fulfillment of prophecy. And it's like, if you just picture the prophet like in his day and he's looking ahead and he's seeing these events, it's like he's looking at a mountain and he's just describing the mountain. He's describing what he sees. But as we know from mountain ranges, like he can't see it, but from behind that mountain, there's another one and then another one and then another one. In other words, that prophet was only seeing maybe what was going to be fulfilled in the first century. That's the first mountain. But God can then fulfill that same prophecy again in another age. And maybe that's where we are today. And he's going to fulfill it. There's a third mountain even behind that one that he's going to fulfill at the very last days. And so that's one way that theologians and scholars try to describe like how so much in Revelation seems to have already been fulfilled, but then at the same time, how we're still expecting it to be fulfilled, right? So it's almost like God can use the same prophecy multiple times throughout history. And in a sense, like every Christian since Revelation was written has been living in that reality from that perspective.
Yeah, that's really good. We were earlier talking about living as exiles in Babylon, and of course that language is used in Revelation, Babylon, the whore of Babylon, this sort of language. Yet, the exiles in Babylon is a reference to what we see in the book of Jeremiah, which some would say is foreshadowing a lot of what's happening in the apocalyptic literature. I don't know about you guys, but I'm exhausted from the culture war. And that's why we are running the first ever Bless God Summit to equip, empower, and inspire people to be the solution to the culture war, to be the hands and feet of Jesus on this side of eternity. And at the first ever Bless God Summit, we are going to be talking about what it means to live a better story and build better culture. And hearing from speakers such as my man Alan Parr and his wife Jen Parr from the Beat YouTube channel, my man John McCrae from What Do You Mean, Dr. Sean McDowell, and Preston Perry. And this will all be happening in Carlsbad, California, March 27th, 28th, and 29th at the beautiful Westin Resort and Spa. To get more information, including the full lineup of speakers and access to tickets, go to blessgodsummit.com now. But what we see in Jeremiah and the instruction that the children of Israel have to live is that they're not to flee, that they're to stay, to pray for the peace and prosperity of the land. I'm specifically referencing Jeremiah 29. They're there to plant gardens. They're there to think multi-generationally. Do you kind of view Jeremiah as a potential prescription, Jeremiah 29 specifically, as a potential prescription for how Christians should think about living in this modern Babylon era today?
Yeah, I totally do. And the reason is because Peter literally describes followers of Jesus as exiles in this world. And so he picks up on that theme. He says, as exiles and foreigners, referring to Christians. So there's an expectation like those in the Old Testament in Jeremiah that were taken away to Babylon. There's an expectation that we are not in our natural home, that we are awaiting a kingdom or the promised land, whatever imagery you want to use, heaven. And so, yeah, there's an expectation that while we're here, what should our mentality be? And I love that piece in Jeremiah because it was unexpected, shocking to them, really. They were like, when do we get home? When do we get out of this discomfort? When do we get to kick off the shackles and go back to life as it was? And God's response was, that's not the plan. My plan for you is to actually stay, build houses, do good work with integrity, raise families, and to seek the welfare and prosperity of this city that you were exiled in. And that must have hit them so hard, you know?
Yeah. I'm going to pull up the passage right here for those folks that are like, what is he talking about? This is the passage, Jeremiah chapter 29. And here, right before, it says, this is what the Lord Almighty, the God of Israel, says to all those I carried into exile. And then it goes on, verse 5, build houses and settle down, plant gardens and eat what they produce, marry and have sons and daughters, find wives for your sons and give your daughters in marriage so that they too may have sons and daughters. Increase in number there, do not decrease. So the increase in number there is very interesting. Increase in number there, do not decrease. And then this is to me the punchline also, seek the peace and prosperity of the city to which I have carried you into exile. Pray to the Lord for it, because if it prospers, you too will prosper. And then he doubles down. This is what the Lord Almighty, the God of Israel, says. And there's additional prophecy here. I love that passage. I think that's really interesting. And so you're saying that Peter is kind of doing this throwback and this callback to this passage of being exiles in Babylon.
Totally. Because that mentality, the exile was a traumatic, life-altering experience for God's people that was like in their blood. Like they couldn't shake the remnants of that experience even centuries later. So yeah, the New Testament ties that experience to what it's like to follow Jesus now. I mean, he was killed. He was rejected by the powers of the world. And he says, expect the same treatment, expect the same opposition. And so I think thinking of ourselves as exiles, as followers of Jesus, it does a couple of things that are helpful. One, it like creates realistic expectations. Like we live in an age that is totally addicted to comfort and convenience, and I love them as much as anybody. But what scripture helps us realize is like, no, there's going to be times when your faith, it feels like the world is squeezing you, and when it's really uncomfortable and it's going to cost you something. And in those moments, it's not a warning sign on the dash that you veered off the course of God's will, which is our first instinct. We're like, shoot, I gotta get back to comfort. I must be doing something wrong that God's allowing this to happen. And scripture says, no, you're in exile. Like this discomfort actually confirms that you are walking with Jesus. And so there's just great comfort in that.
Yeah.
The other thing is we live in a time where it's like we're pushing back a lot on culture. It's us versus them. This just shatters that. It's like, seek the welfare of your religion-hating, Jesus-rejecting neighbor. You know, like their life should be more blessed because you live next door or you work in the office next door, whatever it is, right? Like, seek the welfare and the peace of all people, and be a conduit of God's common grace, which just is the fact that God shows kindness to those that love him and those that hate him. And we're meant to bring that wherever we go, that grace, which I think is beautiful.
I love that. So writerscircle.co, we'll have that in the link and the description and the pinned comment below. Sign up for that. Totally free weekly newsletter from Will. I think you guys will be blessed by it. And I'm going to go over with him right now to the Patreon exclusive segment of our conversation. It's a little too spicy for YouTube. We're going to be talking about all the lunacy that's happening here in our home state of California and why Christians should or shouldn't be fleeing California. Some of the crazy stuff that's happening on a global scale with the political stuff and the election. We just don't want to talk about it on YouTube. All right, and we'll see you guys on Patreon.